Oh hi, didn't see you there. I'm Idle, president of MMORPGs. I'm just taking a World of Warcraft killer in this here toilet. Oh hi, didn't see you there. A WoW killer is a term used for any MMORPG that came out in the 2000s to early 2010s that was supposed to kill World of Warcraft. Oh hi, didn't see you there. There were a lot of World of Warcraft killers that came out, and there's a ton of threads on Reddit and other forums reminiscing on those now long forgotten games. But when scouring those posts, one game keeps coming up. Wildstar.
Wildstar wasn't like your typical MMORPG. It took place in space, but it didn't take place in Star Wars, making it a unique combination that let it stand out from the pack of dime a dozen high fantasy sword and shield MMORPGs. Despite that, its story is a lot like all the other World of Warcraft killers that came before it. It released in 2014 to a good amount of success, went free to play a year later after subscriber numbers dropped, and ultimately shut down in 2018. But for some reason, people keep reminiscing about Wildstar as the one that got away. It's the only WoW killer I've seen that keeps coming up.
So what made Wildstar so special? And if it was so special, why did it shut down? I don't know, but I'm sure someone does.
Patreon.
Let's start where any good story starts. The middle. That's called a smash cut. Wildstar was getting some serious hype in the months leading up to its release. It wasn't being called a WoW killer. It was being called the WoW killer, which is especially impressive when you consider by 2014, most of the WoW killers were shut down. But Wildstar was different. It was ambitious. It was polished. It was a whole new experience in the industry. Jeremy Gaffney, the studio lead of Carbine Studios, who created Wildstar, called the game one that no sane human being would make. That's a red flag, Jeremy, I'm not gonna lie to you. So when the game launched in June of 2014, to no one's surprise, it did really well. It was clear to anyone who created a character and played through the first few levels that this wasn't just World of Warcraft in space. This was something new. The world was bright and vibrant and colorful. It had sarcastic humor that was reminiscent of Fallout or The Outer Worlds. Everything about its presentation just felt like something the MMO genre was lacking. This wasn't all that surprising. Carbine Studios was founded back in 2005 by a group of former WoW developers, and not long after their founding, they brought on RPG legend Tim Kaine to help with the programming and design of the game. Tim Kaine, by the way, created games like Fallout and The Outer Worlds, and oh, That explains the thing I said before. This was a team of experts that knew that if they wanted to stand out in an ever-growing field of World of Warcraft clones, they had to do something truly different. But those differences go way beyond just the visual presentation of the game. Right off the bat, at character creation, you'd be introduced to something called paths. If you think of your class as how your character does things, like stalking around as a stalker or warrioring around as a warrior, paths were what your character does in the open world. There were 4 paths to choose from, and each would introduce a whole set of missions to the open world for you. Soldiers could run into this thing called holdouts that would send waves of enemy at you that you had to fight through. Explorers were tasked with climbing up mountains to activate beacons or discovering secret hidden areas in the world that only explorers could get to. Completing these missions would grant you Path XP, which would level up your path, a totally separate progression system to your class level. And at certain milestone path levels, you'd unlock new path-specific abilities. It was a really fleshed out system that allowed players to determine how they wanted to interact with the open world, something that is really rare in linear MMOs like World of Warcraft and Wildstar. These paths were directly inspired by what's known as Bartle types. Bartle types were first written about by Richard Bartle, a MUD designer and general MMORPG legend. He was trying to figure out why players played MMORPGs and came up with these 4 types, which the Wildstar team then took and directly implemented it into the game, an idea I really love. Even to this day, I think it's an incredible addition to the game, and I'm mad that we don't have it anymore, but paths aren't even the half of it. The class design itself was something completely unique to most MMORPGs.
Wildstar was based on the holy trinity of class design: tanks, healers, and the people who don't like to think while playing video games.
Let's do this. Leroy Dragon!
This is the standard design in any class-based MMORPG, but it does tend to have a few ugly knock-on effects. Think back to vanilla World of Warcraft. If you were going to put together a raiding team for any of the raids, you needed priests. They were by far the best healers. They could dispel magical effects and much more than holy paladins, for example. They were fully necessary to have a good shot at completing these massive encounters, leaving other healers and roles out. And despite World of Warcraft's innovation of being extremely solo-friendly compared to EverQuest, not all classes were created equal when it came to soloing content, which can be extremely frustrating if you want to play a warrior but you keep dying because, oh my god, have you played an early warrior? This shit sucks. Tim Kaine, who spent 3 years as the lead designer, highlights both of these issues and more in his video on Wildstar's class design that he originally presented back in 2008. A key piece of Wildstar's class design was having toolkits that went beyond what you'd expect to find for their roles. The main way this came into play was by giving every class access to assault, utility, and support abilities. This was another way that Wildstar broke off from the traditional MMO design of WoW killers at the time. Instead of choosing a single specialization, you could use any 8 of these abilities on your ability bar, known as the limited action set, to fill out your build and play the way you wanted to play. It meant classes were versatile and could be adapted to specific situations, making soloing and filling out raid roles a lot more possible for everyone. And in my opinion, Wildstar still managed to maintain a good sense of class identity. If you were playing a spellslinger, you weren't going to confuse yourself with a stalker, because the things you did were still completely different, even if they could result in similar effects. By the way, this is something that's really hard to do if you're trying to balance classes while still making them feel unique, so it deserves a ton of credit. And of course, the most important thing when talking about class design is combat. Combat is where most of the WoW killers tried to set themselves apart, and Wildstar is no different in how it tried to be different. In the early 2010s, there were 2 really popular combat systems dominating multiplayer games. You had your standard tab target system from World of Warcraft and every other MMO, and you had the skill shot system from MOBAs like League of Legends. Wildstar, faced with a decision between 2 roads that would define the game forever, chose both? Almost all of your abilities in Wildstar have telegraphed attacks, just like you'd see enemies use against you in Final Fantasy XIV, or like you'd see yourself do in League of Legends. But you can also tab target, which is it's useful for you'd want to do this. Okay, listen, this is just a skill shot system. The tab targeting is at best a quality of life feature, but they really highlighted this hybrid system in their marketing. So here you go. It's both. It's really skill shots though. The combat though was extremely fun. That much is true. While other games tried their best to make the tab target system WoW popularized more interactive, like Age of Conan's combo system, I feel like skill shots actually accomplished the goal of making combat more action oriented. Funny enough, I feel like what Wildstar was doing with combat almost predicted where World of Warcraft would go with combat. These days, World of Warcraft mimics an ARPG a lot more than it mimics an MMORPG. And that means a lot more of your abilities are based on positioning and aiming. It's still a tab target system, but there are those hints of what Wildstar was doing in 2014. It's just an interesting parallel from a game that was trying to take down World of Warcraft. But Wildstar's most distinctive feature, in my opinion, was much simpler than an overhauled combat system or class design. It was movement. If you've tried a lot of MMORPGs, you know that it is surprisingly rare to find a game whose movement controls feel as smooth as World of Warcraft's, which is a big problem when moving is the thing you'll do the most in any of these games. So it's just like a little important to get right. Wildstar nailed all the basic movement controls that you'd hope a multi-million-dollar game would get right. But if you can't tell by now, Wildstar was trying to do a lot of innovative stuff when it came to the MMO genre. So the devs at Carbine put their heads together and came up with something revolutionary. The double jump. Okay, so that sounds like not a big deal, but honestly, for an MMO, this was actually really exciting. I mean, think back to playing whatever game you loved as a kid, MMO or single player. There was a good chance you were jumping around looking for ways to get on rooftops or clip out of bounds to see secret areas or trying to find pathways up a mountain that were just smooth enough for you to climb. Or you played RuneScape and you couldn't do any of that. Wildstar's Double Jump was a feature that encouraged that kind of exploration, that harkened back to the earliest days of MMOs in a way that brought the wonder back to the game. It's a part of MMORPGs that felt forgotten back then, and especially now. There was also a sprint button that let you jump even further, sometimes letting you reach collectible items. Wildstar basically had a whole platforming system built into the game. It might sound like I'm overselling some pretty simple mechanics here, but the impact this had on how the game felt, in my opinion, was monumental. You can create as many unique combat and crafting and raid systems as you want to make your game feel different, but this sort of movement made it so that you would never confuse playing Wildstar with playing any of the other MMOs that were flooding the market. These days, advanced movement like dodging and sprinting and jumping puzzles are somewhat common in modern MMOs. But back when Wildstar did it, it was truly an innovation. And I think they did a great job implementing it and creating incentives around the world to actually use this system. But this last feature is what, for a lot of people, really defined Wildstar. This was the first feature that Wildstar was advertising for its game. It was that important. Housing in MMORPGs was still a pipe dream for most games. Final Fantasy XIV wouldn't have player housing until a few months after Wildstar had announced their housing feature. World of Warcraft, at the time that I'm recording this, still doesn't have housing and won't until sometime next year in 2026. RuneScape has had housing since 2006, so, you know, I've always said this game is ahead of its time, both mechanically and graphically. Wildstar's housing system, though, went far and above what RuneScape and other comparable MMOs had in place. Your house existed on a massive sky plot where you could grow a garden, build a mine, craft at a personal crafting station, and so much more. And then there was the house itself, where you could completely customize the exterior and interior down to floating tables and chairs and the position and size of windows. It was actually levels of customization that we still don't see in MMO housing these days. And the housing system was even built into the open world, where you could find decorations for your house by killing monsters and completing quests, and there was an incentive to get those decorations. Carbine had borrowed the rested XP system from World of Warcraft, where you get a boost to your XP when you log out in a rest area, like an inn. Houses in Wildstar provided the best rested XP boost and would improve based on how decorated your house was. This is such a small but cool incentive to actually go out there and work on your house if you're not just like a vain person who loves cosmetics. And if that's not you, I don't really know what you're playing MMOs for. If any feature was the selling point for Wildstar, I truly think housing was it. But even if housing wasn't your thing, there were so many other great features to get you hooked on the game. Right?
Wildstar had a lot of great sounding features, but that's kind of all they were. Great sounding features. It's far too common to see a game, MMORPG or otherwise, that is just a collection of cool features haphazardly thrown together into a kind of design soup that doesn't really end up flowing together to accomplish one cohesive design goal. And in my opinion, Wildstar was design soup. A soup I didn't want to eat. Drink? To me, this was Wildstar's core issue. Nothing about the game felt cohesive.
Wildstar's art, trailers, dialogue, and more all painted the game to feel kind of childlike. Like this reveal trailer from Gamescom 2011. Feels like it could have been written by the Avengers.
Back already?
And you made friends.
Shut up and kill something.
I mean, this trailer does look like it's heavily inspired by Disney/Pixar, doesn't it? That's not me thinking that. That's me plagiarizing the NVIDIA description for the video, which why did NVIDIA upload this? That seems weird. There's nothing inherently wrong with the tone they were going for, though. If that's the feel of the game, then great. I actually think that style really complements the path system that lets players do what they want, enabling some super cozy gameplay loops that have a real place in MMORPGs. The problem is that the marketing team and the game design team seem to be on different pages.
Because it's time to unleash raids. Oh, I'm sorry.
Remember how Wildstar's development studio, Carbine, was founded by a bunch of former WoW developers? Well, they were determined to bring the more hardcore nature of World of Warcraft over to Wildstar, and that meant taking a lot from the vanilla version of World of Warcraft's raiding scene. Raids in vanilla World of Warcraft weren't content you could just wander into. Before you could fight Onyxia in her lair for the first time, you had to become attuned to the raid. The attunement process was different for each raid, but it typically required completing multiple different dungeon runs or killing extremely powerful enemies, requiring at least 10 people in a group. And then you had to spend literally an hour flying all over the map on the ridiculous flight paths from NPC to NPC. The Onyxia attunement alone, at least on the Horde side, will take you easily a day to complete, with all the back and forth and time spent coordinating groups to enter dungeons like Upper Blackrock Spire and killing the multiple raid level dragons in the open world. I personally loved the Onyxia attunement quest the first time I did it, and I know a lot of people felt the same way as me. It helped connect the raid in with the larger world and built up the bosses within to feel like these real existential threats. But by 2008, with the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, Blizzard had mostly gotten rid of attunements because in reality, they had become more tedious than interesting. Once you experienced attuning once, it was never really something you looked forward to doing ever again. But Wildstar, 10 years after vanilla World of Warcraft released, tried to bring them back. And it wasn't great.
This is the Genetic Archives, a 20-man raid and the first raid you'd be able to enter in Wildstar. As soon as you hit the level cap of 50, you'd be given the first quest in the attunement chain, which you had to complete to be able to participate in this raid. I have to get my phone for this part because the attunement list is kind of crazy and I can't remember it all. Step 1, you need to earn 150 Elder Gems so you can buy the attunement key. Here's the cool thing about Elder Gems. You get them by gaining XP post-level cap. Sounds simple enough. The problem is, at the time of release, you were limited to 140 Elder Gems per week. Let's do some quick math, shall we? 150 minus 140. You'd be short 10. You'd be short 10 Elder Gems. Why? Step 2, kill a world mini-boss. That's easy, check. Step 3, grind out 32,000 reputation with your faction to reach the beloved status. Step 4, complete a stealth quest to, I literally wrote, get something, I don't know. Step 5, get a silver medal in all 4 of the adventures that are in the game. All right, so adventures are like open world dungeons that are meant to be completed either solo or with a group of players. But getting a silver medal in these adventures required you to complete an additional challenge on top of it, usually something like going deathless or completing it within a certain time. From what I read, these can be a bit tricky, but they're not the hardest thing in the world. Step 6, do another quest, and then you're done. Oh, with the first half. There are 11 steps in total to this attunement chain that take varying amounts of time and also are sometimes really, really hard. One of these steps requires you to get 4 more silver medals in dungeons, which from everything I've read, because I wasn't good enough in 2014 to actually do this was a really, really hard step that required a coordinated group that knew what they were doing. And if you've played an MMORPG before, those are rare. My apologies to anyone who's had me as a healer. All things considered, it wouldn't be surprising if this attunement chain took you 4 days or even a full week to complete. Now consider that to find 20 people who had completed that was pretty rare in Wildstar. Listen, I understand what the developers were trying to do here. I even said myself that I loved my Onyxia attunement chain, and I loved a little bit less my Molten Core attunement chain. But by 2014, the attunement chain design pattern was well beyond its expiration date, so making one that is even more intense than anything that World of Warcraft had done is a weird decision that wasn't very popular. And it's also a really jarring thing to go through right after you hit level cap in what is a pretty casual, friendly leveling experience.
The raids themselves were advertised from the start as being no mercy and only for the most hardcore gamers. And they were. Raids were punishing, exciting, and required 20 to 40 man groups that knew what they were doing to have any chance at clearing them. They were extremely well received by everyone who got to play through them, but the problem is, hardly anyone did. The barrier to entry was just too high. Both raids and attunements were changed not too long after launch to make the gameplay smoother. The attunement steps were made slightly less tedious, and the 40-man raid Datascape was scaled down to 20-man because people couldn't find 40 people who were capable of clearing it. The hardcore nature of Wildstar isn't a bad thing. I think there's a real market out there for hardcore MMO players. They're probably going to be some of the worst people you've ever met, but they're out there. And a lot of Wildstar's marketing from the gameplay perspective didn't hide the fact that Wildstar was meant for hardcore players. But there was still that fundamental disconnect between the game's presentation, its mass marketing, and, everything about it, and the hardcore early 2000s MMO it wanted to be. This split between being a hardcore or being a casual game goes way back to the beginning of Wildstar. Jeremy Gaffney said in an interview in 2007, 7 years before the release of the game, "We think we need to be a better hardcore game than the hardcore games, and we need to be more accessible than the more accessible games." To his credit, he acknowledged that that is a hard and even impossible thing to do, but that didn't stop Wildstar from trying to do it. Unfortunately, the problems didn't just start with attunements and raids and marketing. There were issues throughout the game. Class balance in both PvE and PvP were an absolute mess, and despite all the good I had to say on the class designs, they were far from perfect and honestly left a lot to be desired after a few years of playing through them. That's my opinion, but I said it in a video essay, so it's true. The game was littered with bugs, and the performance would struggle on even high-end machines years after its release, and bug fixes would take absurdly long to come out. And then there was housing. Housing was sick, guys. I gotta be honest. This was like the only part of the game I really deep dived in when it was out. I loved housing. I think it's really good. There are people out there who will tell you there were drawbacks. And I mean, it's kind of fair. Anytime you have an instanced hub all to yourself where you can get a lot of meaningful progression done, that's one less person out there in the open world helping it all feel alive. I mean, just look at garrisons from Warlords of Draenor. One of the biggest criticisms of that expansion is that the open world was dead because everyone was locked away in their garrison. Wildstar's housing was meant to be social, though. There were ways to open up your house to have house parties, not unlike RuneScape's house parties. But it was also a step short of the neighborhood system in games like Lord of the Rings Online. So while housing was still an extremely good system, and I think even today if it came out, it would be the best housing system in MMORPGs, there were critics. These issues are just symptoms, in my opinion, of Wildstar's larger issue. World of Warcraft had attunements as a way to bridge your leveling journey to the endgame, connecting the outside world with the instances the raids took place in. They were a solution to a gap in the design of the game. You can feel this in what you actually have to do during the attunements. There's no tedious challenges, it's more story and quests like you've gotten used to throughout most of the leveling. Wildstar's attunements existed because attunements were cool, and they didn't exist anymore, I guess. This is how you end up with design soup. If you just add features in because you liked them in other games or you think they sound cool, odds are you're just adding bloat to the game. Features should only be added in when it's clear what problem that feature solves and how it interacts with the other systems in the game. That's why as other MMOs evolved, like World of Warcraft, features are trimmed from time to time and not just constantly added. Or at least they used to be. World of Warcraft's kind of a mess now. This might all sound like I'm overthinking something that could just be attributed to poor execution, but dare I say, you're underthinking it. Let's take a system I praised a lot, the movement. In isolation, it's fantastic. It's fun, it's fluid, and it just works. But my main praise for it came from its interaction with the world and the design team's emphasis on exploration, both explicitly with the explorer path and implicitly with the world's vertical scale. But as good as the movement system is how as bad the rest of the systems is. Most of Wildstar stalls out in the cool idea stage. Not enough thought was given to the context these systems would exist in, and in my opinion was a big reason players bounced off of the game before they even hit level cap. If you played Wildstar, you probably weren't thinking how the systems didn't interact quite right, but there was a good chance things never really felt fluid to you, and I think this is a big reason why.
All this is to say, the game just kind of felt unfinished. Like there wasn't one design that drove the decisions behind the game, and nothing was really ever agreed upon before it shipped out the door. But the question is, how did a studio with so much talent and money and hype behind it deliver something so mediocre? To find out, we'll have to go to the logical place that the middle of all stories go. The beginning. Like a Christopher Nolan movie. In 2005, a group of former World of Warcraft developers left Blizzard to form Carbine Studios, and you already know this part, I said it at the beginning of the video. What I didn't say is that these weren't just any World of Warcraft developers. We're not talking about people who contributed 1 or 2 lines of code. We're talking about department heads. There was Kevin Beardsley, who was a lead animator and part of the original pitch team for World of Warcraft. You had Kyle Harrison, the lead technical artist on the game. There was even Jason Hayes, the composer of the soundtrack. That's his name on Spotify. That's him. Carbine brought him on as audio director and composer. And this soundtrack's really good, by the way. I listened to it while writing this video, I'm not even joking. Every gaming outlet was talking about and interviewing this group of developers because they were just a part of one of the biggest industry success stories of all time. And now they branched off and were going to do it again? Logically, it didn't take long for publishers to catch wind of Carbine Studios and to start making bids, and in 2007, NCSoft did just that. Thanks to their new American office, led by Robert Garriott, brother of Richard Garriott, who created Ultima Online, NCSoft acquired Carbine Studios. Man, if I had a nickel for every time a group of former Blizzard developers left the company to form their own company that was going to make a new MMORPG and then got acquired by NCSoft, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. By 2008, Carbine Studios had 3 years of development under their belt and a new influx of cash from Big Daddy NCSoft. So the only question is, hey guys, what's the game called? Or like, what do you have? Do you have anything to show for the work you've done these past 3 years? Guys, why are you moving away from me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Turns out Carbine spent their first couple of years doing fucking nothing? I guess this shouldn't be surprising. I mentioned that Carbine was founded in 2005 and Wildstar released in 2014. That's a roughly 9-year development cycle with no other games released in that time. MMORPGs take a long time to make, don't get me wrong, but for comparison, World of Warcraft took roughly 5 years to make from its start to its release. Tryon Worlds, founded 1 year after Carbine, released their MMO Rift in 2011 with a similar 5-year development cycle. Maybe more importantly, most of these MMORPGs had announcements just a couple of years into their development, but all was quiet on the Carbine front. So were they just doing nothing for the first few years? I mean, kind of. According to Tim Cain, the early years at Carbine were focused mainly on creating a completely custom engine so the team could implement all of their wildest ideas without any limitations. But there was still a design team working on the game that whole time, so you'd expect that the design team was hard at work those first few years, you know, designing those wild ideas. But in 2008, when the higher-ups at NCSoft came to check out their progress on the MMORPG, they found that the design team had done nothing. No setting, no classes, no story, nothing. You know what? I'm just gonna say it. That's not very good. So Tim Cain, who was a programmer on the project, took over as design lead and started fleshing out everything. And from that point on, everything went well and the game released and everyone clapped.
No, that doesn't sound right. This must be the script that ChatGPT wrote. Here we go. After Tim Cain took over, everything was bad. It was bad. Yeah, so it turns out after NCSoft took over, Carbine Studios was kind of full of power struggles and ugly politics and was all around a toxic work environment, which, you know, isn't great. Tim Kaine made a video a couple of years ago talking about his experience at Carbine, specifically from 2008 to 2011 when he was the lead design director. I highly recommend you watch this video. It's extremely interesting and kind of sad, but I'll just paraphrase some of the points here. Uh-oh, the phone's out. That means it's another list. Number 1, he was told if he didn't take the design director job, the studio would be shut down. Good start. Number 2, the art director told him he wasn't allowed to talk to the art team. Like ever, he had to go through the art director if he wanted to talk to anyone on the art team. If you know how companies work, let alone game studios, what the fuck? Number 3, one of the art team members came into his office and told him he sucked at design. Number 4, if the studio head Jeremy Gaffney didn't like one of Tim's designs, he would run a design strike team, using Tim's design team to test other ideas. Why even have a design director? Number 5, the art team removed an entire class from the design of the game without telling the designers. Holy crap. But this is just one guy's account of what happened, and it could be, and probably is, very biased. Luckily, there are no other people out there talking about how awful Carbine Studios was at the time. You know what's about to happen, right?
Most of this is in line with my experiences. They killed every desire I had to work in the industry anymore. Carbine was just terribly run from the top down. Egomaniacs abound. Different teams thinking it was a competition between each other to make their own shit shine, instead of working at a game as a fucking team. The power struggle was felt on the art team as well. It was a seriously toxic environment. The main problems I saw there were a culture of finger pointing, lack of cohesive vision from both the publisher and leadership, and little reward or acknowledgement for staff that broke themselves to make that game work and ship. I don't think the leadership while I was there 100% recognized those things. I still am deconstructing the good and bad from that project and studio, and at the end of the day, the game is dead. The studio is dead, and all you can do is move on to better and brighter things. There are a lot more of these comments all over the internet, a lot of them from confirmed former Carbine employees and a ton from people I couldn't verify. But as the saying goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. The environment at Carbine was rotten to its core. The game coming out at all seems like a miracle, especially with some of the technical horror stories I've read about. I mean, their release pipeline made it almost impossible to quickly release features and bug fixes without creating a dozen more bugs on top of it. Most importantly, the game was never being led in one direction. It was a bunch of egos fighting to have the most impact on what they thought would be their career-defining game. And with 9 years to fight, change out department heads, take out features, add in new ones, it's not surprising that the game came out feeling the way it did. It was a game with a ton of cool features. The studio, as toxic as it may have been, was still filled with incredibly talented people. But those people, like the features in Wildstar, couldn't work together to be more than the sum of its parts.
Not long after the release of Wildstar, Jeremy Gaffney stepped down as the lead at Carbine Studios. He had actually foregone skin cancer treatment to see the release of the game. Tim Kaine unsurprisingly left in 2011. Most of the founding members from that World of Warcraft team had left, some even going back to Blizzard. Wildstar struggled to maintain subscriber numbers, and even after switching to free-to-play in 2015, couldn't keep itself running, and the game, along with Carbine Studios, was shut down in 2018. But none of this answers the question: what made Wildstar so special? What happened at Carbine and what happened with Wildstar isn't unique in the game development industry. It's not even unique in the MMORPG industry. So what gives? I think what people miss about Wildstar is the fact that it was the last MMORPG that felt like it actually tried to be something different. Sure, a lot of these games claimed they were trying to do something different by focusing on PvP or giving you combos you had to execute despite still being basically the same tab target combat system. But Wildstar's very DNA was unique. It was something that we hadn't seen before, and a lot of it is stuff we haven't seen since, like the housing system I've talked so much about. What we're seeing now with the reminiscing on Wildstar is people smoothing over the game itself. Those design ideas were interesting at the time and stay interesting now, but when we look back on it, we don't think about how they didn't interact cohesively or were oftentimes a little shallow. We kind of just forget about that and remember that the systems were fun. In isolation, at least. And maybe the biggest reason people seem to miss Wildstar so much is because it's one of the only WoW killers out there that doesn't have a super solid private server scene. It's rare to see an MMO, big or small, not have a sizable private server of some type, at least relative to the success of the game, but Wildstar is one of those. Your options to play it are very limited and also really time intensive to set up on your own. All of these combine to make it a game people both miss and can't revisit, so they're left only to their nostalgic memories. That's a charged term. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. It was good, all right? If you love Wildstar, there was good stuff to it. Ultimately, I think Wildstar is just looked back on as a tragedy. A ton of good ideas put to waste by a development studio that was in turmoil basically from day one. Compared to most other WoW killers that were a dime a dozen, Wildstar feels a lot more like a missed opportunity. Like you had something and you lost it. All I know is that Wildstar's not coming back. But you know what is? Oh God.
Hey, you're a patron. Thank you so much for your support. Hey, you're a patron. I like you very much, cause hey, you're a patron. Patreon is where you're at. You went to the URL in the description and you gave me your money, and that's pretty neat. Hey, you're a patron. Thank you so much for your support. Hey, you're a patron. I like you very much, cause hey, you're a patron. Patreon is where you're at. You went to the URL in the description and you gave me your money, and that's pretty neat.